John shifted uncomfortably on the hard wooden bench as the courtroom slowly filled. Each creak of the door and shuffle of feet seemed unnaturally loud in the silent space, heavy with the weight of decisions yet to be made. Beside him, an elderly lady clutched her purse, her knuckles white, a stark contrast to John's own battle-worn hands that rested on his lap, scarred and steady despite the storm of emotions within. "Is it going to be long, do you think?" the lady whispered, leaning slightly towards John. "Could be," John replied, his voice low but surprisingly calm. "Depends on the judge, really." "Oh, I hope he's kind," she murmured, glancing at the front where the judge's chair sat empty. John nodded, his mind wandering back to Ranger. Kindness can make all the difference, he said more to himself than to his impromptu companion. The woman looked at him curiously. "Are you here for something difficult?" she asked gently, sensing the deep currents of emotion beneath his composed exterior. John hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing a piece of his story. "Yeah, I'm here to say goodbye to my dog, Ranger. He's been my partner through thick and thin, saved my life more times than I can count. But I can't take care of him anymore, not since I got back." "Oh dear," the woman's face softened with compassion. "That sounds heartbreaking. Why does it have to be in court?" "It's a custody thing," John explained, his throat tightening at the term. "My health, it's not what it used to be. I want to make sure he's looked after by someone who can really give him what he needs." "That's very brave of you," she said sincerely, "to put his needs above your own heart." John smiled wryly. "Doesn't feel brave. Feels like I'm giving up my best friend." Before she could respond, the judge entered, and the room fell into an even deeper silence, if that was possible. John straightened up, bracing himself not just for the legal proceedings, but for the moment he would have to stand and talk about Ranger in past terms, to argue for his future without him. As the judge settled and looked around, his gaze fell on John. "I understand we have a somewhat unusual case today," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Mr. John Harper, concerning the custody of a military dog, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." John stood up, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil inside. "That's correct." "Very well," the judge nodded, looking down at his papers. "Proceed." Taking a deep breath, John began to recount his story, each word a testament to his bond with Ranger. The courtroom listened, captivated not just by the tale of loyalty and bravery, but by the raw emotion that even the harshest legal environment couldn't diminish. As John spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted, a reminder that some cases weren't just about legal statutes or property rights, but about life, love, and the sometimes painful duties that come with it. The courtroom was enveloped in a rare silence, punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and the occasional murmur of agreement or sympathy from the audience. "Ranger was with me in Afghanistan," John said, his voice growing firmer with each memory he recounted. "He wasn't just a dog, he was my partner. He alerted our unit to IEDs, saved lives, and in the quiet moments he was the one who kept me sane when everything else was chaos." A slight nod from the judge encouraged him to continue. "When I returned home, Ranger was right beside me. But the war followed us back in different ways. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, and physically, I'm not where I used to be. Taking care of Ranger the way he deserves, it's become more than I can manage." John paused, searching for the right words, his gaze drifting to the door through which he half expected, half hoped Ranger would burst. "I'm not here today to abandon my friend. I'm here to ensure his future. He deserves a home where he can run and play, and a family that can give him the attention and care that I no longer can." The woman beside him dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and she wasn't alone in her sentiment. The human connection to animals, particularly those that serve in conflict, resonated deeply with everyone in the room. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Mr. Harper, it's clear you have given this a lot of thought, and your concern for Ranger's well-being is commendable. However, the decision on where Ranger will go needs to be based on solid grounds. Do you have someone in mind?" "Yes, Your Honor. My sister and her family. They've got a big backyard and kids who adore Ranger. They're more than willing to take him in. And they're prepared for the responsibilities of a military dog." The judge pressed, his eyes scanning a document before him. "They are. They've met with a trainer who specializes in military dogs. They understand what's needed and are prepared to provide it," John replied. a flicker of hope lighting up his eyes as he spoke of his sister's family. The judge nodded thoughtfully before turning his attention to the clerk, whispering a few instructions. A brief recess was called, during which the soft buzz of conversation filled the courtroom. The elderly woman turned to John, her expression warm. "You did well. It's clear how much you care for him." John managed a small smile. "Thanks. It's hard, but it's for the best. Ranger deserves the best." As the recess drew to a close, the judge returned, his expression serious but not unkind. "After considering the circumstances and the arrangements Mr. Harper has proposed, I am inclined to grant his request. It's clear that this decision, although difficult, is made with the best interests of Ranger in mind." Relief washed over John, so potent it nearly buckled his knees. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you." The judge nodded, concluding the session with a final strike of his gavel. "Good luck, Mr. Harper. And good luck to Ranger. It seems he will be well cared for." As people began to filter out of the courtroom, John remained seated, absorbing the reality of the judge's words. Soon his sister would arrive with Ranger, and he would have his final moments with his brave companion. It wouldn't be easy, but as he had learned in the harshest terrains of war and the quiet battles that followed, sometimes the hardest decisions were the most necessary ones. As the door opened and Ranger bounded in, the reunion was bittersweet, filled with tail wags and tears, a final goodbye that was as much a beginning as it was an end. Ranger's exuberant entrance brought a mix of smiles and tears to those lingering in the courtroom. His wagging tail and joyful leaps contradicted the solemnity of the environment, bridging the gap between the world of legal formalities and the raw emotions of human-animal bonds. As Ranger bounded up to John, every muscle in his body seemed to soften, his posture relaxing as he knelt to embrace his dog. Ranger licked his face, whining softly, sensing the gravity of the moment. The people around them, touched by the scene, paused to witness the poignant reunion, understanding that this was more than just an ordinary farewell. "My boy, you're going to be okay," John murmured into Ranger's ear, his voice thick with emotion. "You're going to have a great life, full of love and all the treats you can eat." Ranger responded with gentle nuzzles, his intuitive nature picking up on John's mixed feelings of relief and sorrow. As John's sister, Emily, approached, her eyes were also brimming with tears, though her smile was reassuring. She knelt beside John, putting an arm around him and extending her hand to stroke Ranger. "He'll always be part of our family, John. We're going to take good care of him, I promise." John nodded, managing a grateful smile. "I know, Em. I wouldn't trust anyone else with him." His words, though meant to reassure both Emily and himself, carried the weight of his heart edge. Letting go was the right decision, but it didn't make the process any easier. Emily turned to Ranger, her tone cheerful as she tried to lighten the mood. "You hear that, Ranger? You're going to have the best time. The kids have already set up your bed and picked out a new toy for you." Ranger's tail wagged furiously, his innate ability to live in the moment a sharp contrast to the complexity of human emotions surrounding him. Emily and John shared a look, a silent agreement that they were doing the right thing, no matter how difficult it felt at the moment. As the courtroom cleared out, John took a few last minutes to play with Ranger, throwing a ball down the empty aisle, watching him chase after it with the same vigor as always. Each throw was a mix of joy and a pang of finality, a reminder that these were their last moments of this kind together. Finally, it was time to leave. John clipped Ranger's leash onto his collar, handed the end to Emily, and stood up. His farewell was a deep, long look into Ranger's eyes, a silent message of love and gratitude for the years of companionship. "Take care of him, Em. And let him know I'll always be grateful," John said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his emotion. "I will, John. And you take care of yourself, too. Remember, you're always welcome to come by and see him," Emily replied, her voice equally steady, providing not just a promise but a lifeline. With one last pat on Ranger's head and a deep breath to steady himself, John turned and walked away. He didn't look back, not because he didn't care, but because he knew moving forward was the only way to honor the bond they shared and the new life Ranger was about to begin. Outside, the world went on, indifferent to the small yet significant changes happening in the lives of John and Ranger. But for those involved, today had been a testament to the strength of loyalty, the pain of goodbyes, and the enduring hope that new beginnings bring. As John walked away from the courthouse, the cool air brushed against his face, a slight respite from the tumult of emotions he'd just experienced. The street was busy, the normalcy of everyday life clashing starkly with the profound moment he had just lived. People passed by, caught up in their routines, oblivious to the man who had just said a heart-wrenching goodbye to his best friend. John's steps were automatic, leading him through the familiar paths of the city park, where he and Ranger had spent countless hours. The park was vibrant with the laughter of children and the barking of dogs, echoes of a life that once was. Every corner held a memory, every path a story of the days when Ranger was by his side, his loyal shadow. He found himself at their favorite bench, the one overlooking the small lake, a quiet spot where they had often rested after their long walks. Sitting down, John allowed himself a moment to reflect. The bench felt empty without Ranger's presence beside him, the absence tangible and heavy. Pulling out his phone, John scrolled through photos of Ranger, each image a snapshot of their life together. Ranger covered in mud after a playful day, sleeping peacefully in the sun, alert and watchful during their hikes. The memories brought both smiles and tears, a mixture of joy for the times shared and sorrow for the separation that lay ahead. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the lake, John felt a sense of peace settle over him. He knew Ranger would be happy and well cared for with Emily and her family. The decision, though painful, was the right one for both of them. Ranger would have a life full of love and joy, and John would have the comfort of knowing he had done the best for his friend. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily with a photo of Ranger playing with her kids in their backyard, his tail a blur of motion. Beneath the photo, the text read, "He's already making himself at home. We love him already, and we'll make sure he knows you love him too." A smile broke through John's sorrow, a reminder that while one chapter ended, another began for Ranger, filled with the promise of happiness and care. John typed back a simple, "Thank you, Em. Give him a hug for me." Putting his phone away, John stood up from the bench, his heart a little lighter. He looked out over the lake, the water reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. Life, he realized, was a series of hellos and goodbyes, each parting as significant as the encounters. Today had been a goodbye, but it was also a gesture of love, the kind that transcends words and speaks directly to the soul. With a deep breath, John turned away from the lake and began the walk back through the park, each step a move towards healing. The path might be solitary now, but the bonds of friendship and loyalty he shared with Ranger would forever be a part of him, guiding him forward. As John left the park, the fading sunlight casting long shadows along the path, he felt a strange mix of emptiness and quiet resolve. The rhythmic crunch of his boots on the gravel seemed louder in the absence of Ranger's familiar padding beside him. He stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets, the cool air biting at his skin, and walked toward home. When he reached his small apartment, the silence hit harder. The space that once felt full of life now seemed aching quiet. Ranger's bed sat in the corner, his favorite toy, a well-worn ball, resting beside it. John froze for a moment, staring at the empty spot where Ranger would always greet him, tail wagging, ears perked. He walked over to the bed and knelt down, picking up the ball. Turning it over in his hands, he chuckled softly to himself. "You really chewed the life out of this thing, didn't you, buddy?" he muttered. The sound of his own voice felt foreign in the stillness of the room. John set the ball down and sat on the couch, staring at the empty leash hanging by the door. The memories were overwhelming, but he refused to let himself wallow. Ranger wouldn't have wanted that. He had always been the kind of dog who lived in the moment, who taught John, in his own way, how to keep moving forward no matter what life threw at you. Later that evening, as John sat with a steaming cup of coffee, his phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. "Just wanted to share this. Thought you'd like to see how he's settling in." Attached was a video. John opened it, and his screen lit up with the sight of Ranger bounding around Emily's backyard, chasing her kids as they laughed and called his name. The camera panned to Ranger lying down, one of the kids scratching his ears while he looked utterly content. The sight brought tears to John's eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. "He's happy," John replied. "That's all that matters. Thanks for keeping me updated." Emily responded almost immediately, "Always. You're welcome anytime to visit. The kids already adore him, and honestly, so do I." John smiled, wiping at his eyes. He leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't easy to accept, but he knew now that Ranger was exactly where he needed to be. Over the next few weeks, John threw himself into a new routine. He started attending counseling sessions for veterans, something he had resisted for years but now realized he desperately needed. He also reconnected with old friends who had served alongside him, sharing stories of both war and recovery. Every few days, Emily sent updates about Ranger, pictures of him lounging in the sun, videos of him playing fetch, and even a snapshot of him curled up at the foot of her bed. Each update was a balm for John's aching heart, a reminder that he had made the right decision. One evening, as John sat reviewing some old photos from his military days, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a live video call from Emily. He answered, and there on the screen was Ranger, his face filling the frame as his tail wagged furiously. "Hey, buddy," John exclaimed, his voice cracking slightly. Ranger perked up at the sound of John's voice, barking excitedly and pawing at the screen. Emily laughed from behind the camera. "He misses you, you know. Every time I show him your photo, he gets all excited like this." John chuckled, his heart swelling. "I miss him too. But I can tell he's happy. That's what matters." Emily tilted the camera to show her kids playing with Ranger in the background. "We're taking good care of him, John. I promise you that." "I know you are, John said, smiling through the tears that blurred his vision. "Thank you for everything." As the call ended, John felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. While the pain of separation still lingered, he knew Ranger was thriving, surrounded by love and laughter. It wasn't the life they had together, but it was a good life, and for that, John was endlessly grateful. With a deep breath, he stood, walking over to the leash still hanging by the door. He held it for a moment before carefully placing it in a box alongside Ranger's old toys. It wasn't goodbye, it was just a new chapter. And like Ranger had taught him through years of unwavering loyalty, John would keep moving forward, one step at a time.